CRF300L. What do we think of this thing? Bought this bike about 1.5 years ago. I've been doing some mods to it, doing some modifications. And in this video, we're just gonna kind of give it a progress report and tell you, is it worth it or not? Should we have thrown all this money into it? Or is this a big silly waste of time? If you're not a normal viewer of mine, you haven't caught my videos, bought this thing in 2021, and I've got around $6 grand-ish or so in mods in it right now. Surely I've completely transformed the bike, right? It should be noted that those are including everything I've done to this bike, and this bike has sort of 4 different setups it can be in. Enduro mode, which it's still mostly in right now, dual sport mode, kind of like how it comes, adventure mode, and then supermoto mode, which has $2,200 rims that aren't even on it right now. Real quick, we got to do a quick side conversation about this because I know it's going to get brought up a whole bunch in the comments. I could do an entire video on this subject, let me know if you want me to, but that is, if you're gonna put that much money into this bike, why didn't you just get CRF300RL or KTM 500EXE and a number of other hardcore enduro bikes like that? Those bikes aren't really directly comparable. I mean, one of those bikes is an off-road bike with a license plate, turn signals, so it can go on the streets, and the other one is a dirt bike with license plate, street equipment, so they can go on the street. They both say CRF in the name. They look the same. They got 2118s with long travel suspension. They cross a lot of the same things. With the CRF450RL, you're gonna pay an extra 5 or so grand, and for that, you're gonna get a lightweight aluminum frame, almost double the horsepower, way better suspension. So there it is, right? You spend more money, you get a better bike, right? No, it's not that simple. The big difference there is that the CRF engine is a street engine. It's got 8,000 mile oil change intervals, where the CRF 450RL's got like, what, 600, 800 mile oil change intervals. The CRF is built to a budget, it's affordable. 450RL is a race bike that's been retuned to be just, you know, sort of street legal and get the job done. High maintenance, cool bike. While certainly you could go buy either bike and use them to be a bike you can putt around town and then go hit the local trails. They will both do that just fine. They do have sort of a different purpose in working. If you ride this one around the world, you can take the other one and do a couple mods and take it on a motocross track. The other thing that I think is really worth noting when making that comparison is that a whole lot of the money that I put into this bike, I would have just as well put into something like the CRF 450RL. I would have thrown a motard kit on it, crash protection, exhaust, mods. Obviously there was a handful of specific mods that we had to do to this thing that maybe you wouldn't have to do to something like the 450RL. I think one of the big ones that would come up would be like suspension. Suspension on this is kind of a have-to-do thing, unless you're fairly light or just really are cool with just putting around real slow off-road. Where with something like the 450RL, you know, as long as you weren't too heavy, you could probably get away with it. But then again, I know I would have modified it anyway. It's just something I do to my bikes now. I really enjoy having these bikes with custom setup suspension. It is without a doubt one of the best mods you could ever do, even if your bike comes with really good suspension. Modifying it to be custom for you and how you're gonna ride is really, really awesome. With them having different purposes, and most of that money I would have spent anyway on the other bike. Also, I think it's worth noting right now to say that you don't have to throw like 6 grand to one of these to make them cool. I did, because we're trying to kind of throw everything at this thing and see where we can end up. We even tried to show in the videos like the suspension, which is one of the big upgrades, that there are other ways to do it. With all that being said, let's actually dig into this bike, talk about how it was and how it is now with the modifications. In stock trim, this bike is a humble little trail bike, good little humble around town bike, nothing too exciting or fast. It's just, it'll get the job done. One of the things that was really annoying is that it just didn't have a lot of oomph to get up things. Sometimes, you know, you need to pick the wheel up. In stock trim, you're really gonna have to give a big bounce and a big old clutch kick to try to get the wheel up sometimes to get over an obstacle. It certainly is capable. It doesn't feel much different to me than like almost like a stock DRZ 400S. You know, maybe the suspension would be a little better on that and it would have a little more grunt, but it's nothing to get excited about. What this bike will do very well, stock or modified for that matter, is cruise at highway speeds basically all day. A lot of people would say a bike like this is terrible on the highway because you don't got any wind protection, the engine's just you know, really revving there. I think the important thing to note is that the engine is very sound. It's smooth, it's reliable, and it doesn't care. It will sit at like 8 grand through multiple states almost wide open. Ask me how I know. And there's been other people who've gone even further with these. You're probably aware of Itchy Boots, who's done a massive trip on hers, and actually doesn't even look like she's gonna keep going on that bike, is what it sounds like. She's gonna do more trips with it. The old version of this bike, the 250L mill, people ran that thing around the world all the time. It was kind of known for that, where other bikes like the CRF300 250, you don't really hear about that. Maybe it is capable, I don't know, but I just know that, you know, that's kind of a old 90s engine that was always designed as a dirt bike engine, where this was, I think, 2014 or something, maybe 2013 was the first year of this engine. They've done some updates through the years, but that's the mill that this is built off of, and it was always built as a long maintenance intervals, good street motor. And that's kind of a cool key with this bike, is that it will put up with that sort of highway abuse. Other bikes in that realm, like the DRZ, yeah, if it's a newer engine, I wouldn't be as worried about doing that, but I wouldn't feel as good about it. And any of the hardcore enduro bikes, like the 450RL, KTMs, plated WR450, like I used to have, having that bike scream down the highway all day will probably end up with something blown up. So how have the modifications changed all that? Have we made the bike hardcore? Is it basically a 450RL now, but with all the reliability? Well, no. And realistically, if you're buying one of these thinking, oh, I can throw some mods at it and get it there, probably not. That would be the ultimate unicorn, right? Keep the level of reliability of that with the performance of the 450, but that's unrealistic. However, though, we have made some big changes here, and they've been very much worth it. So we have a Supermoto kit, and that's going to be one of the most drastic changes to this bike when you throw it in that mode. It's an awesome little Supermoto, especially with the other supporting mods we've done to it. Now, I know not everyone's going to do that, but if you do, this is a sport that's most fun with friends, so, you know, if you can find a local group or convince your buddies to buy them, that's what I originally did. Now, one of the biggest things I think we changed that made a huge difference would be the suspension. We threw the full Race Tech rear shock in there, and gold valves with a spring kit in the front. This puts a spring in both forks. I think that's very important. I know there's a lot of other kits out there that throw a stiffer spring in the one side, and a lot of people say, oh, that fixes it, but I really love what Race Tech did there with the two springs in both sides to really help balance things out. I think this is going to do a lot better for things like the wheel bearings, even the steering stem bearings over time. That's just a lot of weird torsional things going on there when you only have a spring in one side. Now, with that kit in there, we still do not have adjustable suspension, but I do not feel like that's a problem because this bike has been set up for me. I think a lot of people, it's so funny, people want adjustable suspension so bad. They turn their nose up to bikes that don't have it. Yet you give them a bike with adjustable suspension, and 99% of people will never touch those adjusters. They don't want to, they don't know how they work, they don't want to get the bike out of whack. And here's the thing, even if you do know how to do it or you pay someone to do it, once you have them set, you're good to go. Like, oh, today I ate 2 tacos extra, so I'm gonna add a tiny bit more preload. We're not doing that. That's just not a thing. Race Tech itself has some cheaper options, or one of the other brands out there. I'm sure they're all gonna make a very big difference. I can tell you with the Race Tech kit on there, it makes the bike feel like, well, it feels like a proper dirt bike now. It feels great. There's a lot of confidence in the bike now, especially with the front end. I really know what it's doing. The rear is awesome. It just takes everything now. It doesn't squat out. In stock trim, you'll find the suspension is absolutely terrible. We just talked about this in a 5 things I think Honda needs to fix about this bike video. This will be the biggest, coolest thing. I know everyone wants to throw an exhaust on it and do all this other stuff. If you're on a budget and you want to make this bike better, budget for the suspension to start. That's going to be your #1 thing. It's going to really, really make this bike just awesome. One of the points though I made is that the Race Tech suspension is serviceable. You can send it off. I think their cheap version of their shock is around $800. A lot of people go with something like a K-Tech, which is around, I think, maybe $600. It's not set up custom for you like the Race Tech one is, and if you ever had issues with it, I tried to research this. I can't find a place, at least anywhere in the North America, to send that shock to. I think I'd have to send it all the way back to where they manufacture it, but even then I tried to look into that. I couldn't find any sort of serviceability stuff. I couldn't find any manuals on those shocks, so I feel like you're kind of buying another non-serviceable shock, just a more expensive one. I would throw a few more bucks down and get the Race Tech. It's going to be custom set up and warranted, serviceable, the whole 9. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people have gone with the K-Tech, and I'm sure that's fine, and I'm not trying to crap on that. I'm just saying that I see the value in the Race Tech. Before we get into the engine, which I know everyone wants to talk about, let's talk about some of the other just random things on the bike. A lot of it's just random sort of customizable things like the graphics kit. The bars that we're running, those are ones that fit well to me. The seat's actually kind of a big one in there. I know the stock seat doesn't feel terrible. It's not like one of those super hard seats, but for me it's actually almost too soft. I could actually bottom the seat out where you feel like the hard plastic under it. I have a comfort seat from Seat Concepts, and in this case I went with the tall one just because I felt like this bike's set a little low. Now that I've got the suspension done and it's sitting in its tall enduro wheels, oh my god, this thing's tall. It's actually the most comfortable seat I've ever owned on a motorcycle outright. What was one of those days? Rivet was telling us it was like over 15 hours or something. Maybe it was 16 hours on the road. Long day. We were riding all day, just blasting on the highway, sitting in that seat. I never thought about the seat. It was the weirdest thing. I thought I was going to be dying, having horrible back pains, but it was actually quite comfortable. So the Seat Concept seats, good seats. We are kind of in an air traffic thing here. And we also, of course, have all the protection stuff on there, skid plate, crash bars, hand guards. These are all things I would do on any bike, and they've all worked very well on this bike. Every time I've had a little spill or anything, I don't even have to think about it. I just pick the bike up and keep on going. We recently added an IMS fuel tank on there. It's gonna cost you a little over $400 shipped, and it's gonna give you about 30 extra miles of range. That's all I can really say about it. Now we also have added Baja Designs XL Pro to the front of the bike. That's a lot of work to put that on there. My hope was when we first set that up, I was gonna really make this guide that anybody could follow really easy. I even made templates for other people to follow along with, but it is kind of a lot of work to do. And it's not exactly cheap, but it's awesome. So it would be cool if somebody just made a kit to do it. I think that'd be a little more doable. And people make kits like for other bikes. Even Baja themselves make a kit for the 450 RL. There's also different lights you could pair it with that aren't as expensive. But you know, we kind of went for the super hardcore one because, well, that's kind of what this build's turned into. So now let's talk about the engine. I'm sure that's what a lot of you want to hear about. Have we made this thing more hardcore? Have we made it better? In stock trim, this motor was fairly mellow, and we've done quite a bit to it. We've got full exhaust, all the emission stuff's been removed, CRF cams, opened up the air box on both ends, changed to a DNA filter with a little uni pre-filter, and finally custom tuning, which was a bit of a debacle originally, but is all sorted now. I think a lot of people were worried that we were going to really mess up the low end of this bike, and it's hilarious because it's been the exact opposite. We've hardly gained any top end and had a massive increase in bottom end. There's points in the RPM range now where we have nearly double the power. I think there was a place stock where it was around 12, and we're like a little over 20 now there. So since then I have changed to the CBR intake boot, and I've not re-dynoed the bike or retuned it. Bike definitely still feels very snappy and rompy down low, but has a nice little extra hit up top. I know a lot of you have been waiting for a dyno from that. I don't know if we're gonna be able to get around to it because we have some other stuff coming up here we're gonna be doing to the engine, and I was going to try to get it dynoed before then. I'm having a hard time finding someone locally that'll slap it up on a dyno and do me a run that's like not, you know, I need to try to find someone that's going to have a similar dyno to when I do some more tuning to it, and that's been kind of tricky. Please don't beat me up. And I think again it's worth saying, you know, compared to something like the CRF300L, I think the only real difference there, like thing I wouldn't have done is like the cams. I would have probably just done the bolt-ons. The cams in this, I'm not even really sure they made that massive of a difference. It's hard to say. We threw a bunch on at once and then got tuning and ran it. If I had access to a dyno and could tune it myself and give you numbers with each little step, I would have gladly done that, but that's just not something that I had. Here's the good news though. That low in power delivery did make this bike feel more proper. It made it fun. It snaps up like you want it to. Does it snap up like a 450 or other, more hardcore bikes, or even like a 250 like MX bike? No, but I would say it feels to me kind of like a DRZ with some bolt-ons now, you know? I'm not sure if it's quite like a DRZ with a flat slide. I feel like that's still got a little more snap about it, but not like a ton more. I mean, my DRZ back in the day, for instance, had E-cams, a flat slide carb, airbox mod, full exhaust, and a thin head gasket. You know, consider this, 35 miles an hour, I could yank up a wheelie in third gear. Much beyond that, it was a little bit tricky. You know, you could yank one up at 40, but man, it took a big heave-hove and getting everything just right. This bike is the same. About 35 miles an hour at third gear, she comes up. Start going a little faster than that, it can be done, but it takes a big huff. Actually, it'll do it right now because it's got a 4-tooth rear sprocket on it. It's still like in its enduro trim right now. So, in fact, I did a 4th gear clutch up on the way over here, but I would call that kind of cheating with that sort of gearing. Even in second right now, I'll just snap throttle will come right up. But it is good to know that this engine will respond well to some mods. It does get a lot more woken up, and oddly enough, it wakes up a lot in the bottom end. Now, how that translates to highway speeds, I think that's something a lot of people question, like, oh, is it better now on the highway? Well, I mean, the only way it would really be better is if I paired that with like a really, like a really small rear sprocket or a taller front sprocket. I'm not bothered doing that. I don't really think it's necessary. Like I said before, this engine will just sing right along at highway speeds all day. Gearing it's just gonna make the acceleration worse. You know, I think a lot of people think, oh, we'll do the mods and then we'll change the gearing to have similar acceleration as we did stock. I don't really think that's like a good way to go about it. It doesn't exactly work out that way anyway. If we gear this bike that tall, there's a good chance we'd actually would lose some top speed, I'm willing to bet. I think the bike would just have too hard of a time trying to climb up in those with those taller gears. I mean, as is, stock trim, you really got to push 5th gear pretty hard before you shift into 6th. 6th has got a big difference, which is cool. It's what we always ask for in these bikes. They actually put a good 6-speed transmission in this thing with a tall 6th gear. And you remember, we didn't gain necessarily a ton of power in the high end. If your goal is to do a bunch of mods to make the bike better on the highway, I don't think you're going to get there. Having said that though, I still think you have to consider the other real dual sports out there on the market. Oddly enough, I say one of the best highway ones there is, just because it'll do it all day long. You know, your only other real big option there is something like a 701 or 690, or now I guess a Gas 700. My biggest concern with that bike is it's a KTM, and sometimes they do KTM things. I think they've gotten a lot better, but it's still kind of a hard pill to swallow. I know one of our guys in our Discord is just, you know, spent almost the last year trying to get his fixed. Wasn't a mechanical breakdown, it was just someone ran into him, and it took almost a year to get all the parts for it. He goes to pick it up. Obviously, they didn't even really check the bike out or ever test ride it because the exhaust was smashed into the fuel tank. They never even looked at that. He went for a ride and almost set the whole bike on fire. Then took another handful of months to fix that. Yeah, I worked at a KTM dealer as a tech back in the day. That was one of my first jobs at a motorcycle dealership. And yeah, I want to love KTMs, I really do, but there's just a lot of goofiness there. Maybe that's something we could talk about in another video. So what does all this mean? Is this bike worth it? Do you need to buy it and throw $6 grand into it? Well, I don't think you need to do that. If you do, it'll certainly be a fun bike. I think you have to be realistic though about what these bikes are and what their goal is to be. This bike is a budget motorcycle with an incredibly good streetable engine, something that can put you around the world. With modifications like suspension, a little bit of engine stuff to it, and then your other general knickknacks that you would do to any dirt bike like this, it can be a really solid, good little machine. You know, in the bikes in this realm, I've owned things like modded out DRZ, plated WR450, the XR650R, oh, what a beast. And this thing is not the fastest or lightest. I don't know if it's even best at anything. However, this is really ranking up quick as one of my favorite bikes I've had in this realm. I think a lot of it is I know with this bike, if I wanted to, I could get on it, go run it halfway across the country and back and not worry about it. I realize that's something that's not appealing to a lot of people. If you're the kind of person that's like, yeah, but I just want to jump on and go hit the trails and ride like a bat out of hell, then you should probably look at the 450. It's going to be a better bike. If you want a bike though that just can be an ultimate mule and do a bit of everything and don't mind throwing a few mods at it, that's a really cool motorcycle. If it came this way, the way it rides right now from the factory, the reviewers and everybody else would be going nuts over it. And fun, I mean, that's the real thing, right? Is it fun? Yes. Now, I kind of briefly mentioned before that, yeah, we're going to be doing more stuff to this engine here soon, which is kind of why I wanted to do this review now. In fact, I think this whole thing's actually going to come apart, and we're going to, you know, just do some fun stuff to it while we're in there. But I do have some exciting engine stuff that's going to be going into there. When I ran into Ari out at the Revzilla Get On ADV Fest, we had many of conversations and have stayed in contact since then. And that guy knows his way around these engines, and he sent me some fun parts for this thing. The goal is to hopefully keep the same reliability level that we have now. I mean, it'll probably be somewhat reduced, but hopefully not enough to make any massive difference. So stick around for that. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. These videos do always come out earlier on Patreon, so go check that out. We have our Discord server over there, which is just the time. Everybody over there knows what's going on. We're almost always in there every night, BSing with everybody. If you are on the Patreon and you haven't checked it out, link your account and get in there. All right, anyways, I'm gonna go home and drink some Gatorade and try to feel a little better. You know, I'm basically over this cold, but it's the phlegm, you know. So hopefully you found this helpful. If I didn't answer anything you want to know about the modifications of this bike and how it's changed, just ask it in the comments. I try to be very responsive in there. Otherwise, see you next time.